In a 2017 interview, Ethereum co-founder Vitalik Buterin commented, "There's two kinds of average people. There's the average person who has already heard of Bitcoin, and there's the average person who hasn't. Considering you found your way here, there's a strong chance you've heard of Bitcoin. Maybe you are crypto curious and keen to learn more before jumping in. Or maybe you actively invest in Bitcoin and even other cryptocurrencies, but don't fully understand how it works or why it's valuable." Let's get started. Bitcoin is a radical development in the history of currency because it's the first time anyone has ever created a type of currency that's A, 100% digital, and B, doesn't require a centralized issuer or controller, like a government or a bank. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are only possible because of blockchain technology. Think about fiat currency. Fiat currencies, the US dollar, the British pound, the Japanese yen, are printed by a government. The government decides how much fiat currency to print based on supply and demand. The currency is then managed by a central bank, like the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, or the Bank of Japan. And these guys create monetary policy to keep the economy and inflation stable. Unfortunately, huge problems have come from the centralised control of fiat currency, like financial crises, a widening wealth gap between rich and poor, inflation and hyperinflation, currency debasement, among many other problems. The system is designed in such a way that forces people to trust banks to act in their best interests. And there are many instances where banks and governments fail individuals and entire national populations. Bitcoin's anonymous creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, created Bitcoin as a solution to this very problem, since Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain were designed to exist independently of any central authority, like a central bank or a government. Satoshi Nakamoto posted a thread in early 2009 and famously remarked, "The root problem with conventional currency is all the trust that's required to make it work. The central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency, but the history of currencies is full of breaches of that trust, and that notion is the issue." Bitcoin is created or mined into existence on the Bitcoin blockchain, exchanged between users on the Bitcoin blockchain, and Bitcoin transactions are recorded and stored on the Bitcoin blockchain. Instead of having to trust people, users can trust Bitcoin blockchain technology, which is completely open source, meaning you can see exactly how the Bitcoin blockchain is programmed to do what it says it will do, and it's almost impossible for anyone to change or sabotage it. Many people credit Satoshi Nakamoto for inventing cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. The truth is, the origins of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology go way back. In the early 1980s, a man named David Chaum published a series of papers that predicted the internet would become a playground for mass surveillance and privacy breaches by governments and big tech. He even predicted the traffic analysis problem, whereby governments and big tech would monitor and exploit the habits of people's communications, keystrokes, viewing times, likes, and engagement, aka an algorithm. David was about 15 to 20 years early to the party in making these predictions, and much later he commented, "It's sad to me, but it really is no surprise that the privacy issue has unfolded the way that it has." He knew that encrypting information using cryptography was the only way for people to retain their online privacy. His research led him to develop the blind signature protocol, breaking ground for what would become the modern-day blockchain. Then, in 1990, David created a payment system called DigiCash and launched a digital version of fiat currency called eCash. eCash would still function in the fiat currency system, but would protect the consumer's identity whenever they made an online transaction. According to the history books, eCash was a technically perfect solution for the known issues and risks associated with making online credit card payments, such as security concerns and fees. And it was pretty much genius. In fact, DigiCash started to receive attention, and at one point, Chaum was contacted by Bill Gates and offered $100 million for DigiCash integration across Windows. Chaum declined the offer, and every offer after, paranoid that his invention wouldn't be used how he intended. Chaum wanted eCash to be perfect and was afraid of handing it over to big tech. He commented that The difference between a bad electronic cash system and a well-developed digicash will determine whether we will have a dictatorship or a real democracy. Chom didn't trust anyone or any business to honour the privacy of customers once they had control of digicash. Inspired by David Chom's mission to create a privacy-based currency and internet, 3 computer scientists from the Bay Area in San Francisco launched a new mailing list for discussing cryptography, mathematics, politics, and philosophy. They called themselves the cypherpunks, and they were deeply suspicious of central banks and their control over monetary policy. After witnessing the many financial crises and hyperinflations in the 20th century, the cypherpunks believed that money should be free of government control and ultimately saw problems with digicash, not in terms of its promise for privacy, but as a digital version of fiat currency still controlled by banks. It didn't matter anyway because David lost control of digicash and it was overtaken by investors who tried to pitch digicash to banks. Some banks were interested, but many preferred to stick with physical credit cards, which were hugely popular among consumers. Banks weren't ready to take a risk and embrace purely digital cash because it didn't appeal to customers at the time and they couldn't stand to endorse or buy a product that ultimately would not sell. In 1998, digicash went bankrupt and fell into history's dustbin of failed ideas. It's not that digicash wasn't a great product, it was simply too ahead of its time and suffered from poor leadership management. In the same year, a former employee of digicash and renowned computer scientist Nick Szabo developed the very first form of digital currency called Bitgold. You may want to remember Nick Szabo's name for a later lesson. Different to eCash, Bitgold was not a digital representation of fiat currency, but rather its own form of currency that could function independently of a bank or other central authority. Szabo commented, "I was trying to mimic as closely as possible in cyberspace the security and trust characteristics of gold, and chief among those is that it doesn't depend on a trusted central authority." Bitgold had a few technical shortcomings and was never implemented, though many believe it was the precursor to Bitcoin. Many people believe Nick Szabo to be the anonymous creator of Bitcoin, though he denies this title. Another computer scientist, Wei Dai, had a crack at creating the world's first decentralized currency called B-Money. And although B-Money never officially launched due to technical flaws, many believe that B-Money white paper may as well have been the draft version of the Bitcoin white paper. Then, finally, in October 2008, an individual or group of individuals under the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto released the Bitcoin white paper to subscribers of the cryptography mailing list at Metzdowd.com. Satoshi Nakamoto announced to the group, "I've been working on a new electronic cash system that's fully peer-to-peer with no trusted third party." The Bitcoin white paper, titled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, is 9 pages long. The white paper outlines what Bitcoin is, what problem it aims to solve, and how it functions as a currency on the Bitcoin blockchain. Here's a fun fact for you. The domain bitcoin.org was registered in August 2008 and still today remains who is guard protected, meaning the identity of the person who registered the domain is not public information. Unsurprisingly, that hasn't stopped people from trying to guess Satoshi Nakamoto's true identity, famously resulting in this Californian citizen being dubbed the One, which he denied. One thing we know for sure is that he did not enjoy the media attention when Newsweek broke the story in March 2014. So what makes Bitcoin different to the other failed attempts to create a digital currency free of central control? The answer is that Satoshi Nakamoto was the first to solve the problem of double spending. Let's say you pay $20 for a book in cash at a store. Once that cash leaves your hand and you give it to the shop owner, you can't legally turn around and spend that exact same $20 again on something else. If you were to double spend in this situation, you would be taking that $20 from the cash register without the owner knowing and spending it again. Likewise, when funds are withdrawn from your bank account, banks ensure that the money you spend does in fact leave your account. But the whole point of blockchain is to exclude banks and other financial intermediaries from the transaction process. So there must be a way to avoid spending the same funds multiple times. We need a way to trust that blockchain technology prevents users from double spending. And that's exactly the problem Satoshi Nakamoto solved when he programmed the Bitcoin blockchain. How? Every time someone makes a transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain, all of the nodes within the Bitcoin network must reach consensus, or agree that the transaction is valid before it's stored on the blockchain. We'll elaborate on this in future lessons when we explain how the Bitcoin blockchain works. Someone, presumably Satoshi Nakamoto, implemented Bitcoin in January 2009 when they mined the first block in the Bitcoin blockchain, Block 0, or the Genesis block. Whoever mined Block 0 included the following text in the block header. The Times of 3rd January 2009, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. A headline copied from a British newspaper published earlier that month, and perhaps a hopeful nod to Bitcoin's potential to provide the world with a currency that could function without the government or central banks. The first transaction of Bitcoin occurred on the Bitcoin blockchain 9 days later when Satoshi Nakamoto sent Bitcoin to the wallet address of Hal Finney, a former software engineer and advocate for cryptocurrency and digital privacy. Since that defining moment in history, Bitcoin has had a turbulent start, increasing from a fraction of a cent in 2009 to $1 in 2011 to an all-time high of $69,000 in November 2021. To put that into perspective, $100 invested in Bitcoin in mid-2010 would be worth around $71 million today. I wonder if Bitcoin's anonymous creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, could have predicted Bitcoin's level of success in its short history. In fact, Bitcoin is the fastest growing asset in history. Bitcoin transactions aren't too hard to understand. Anyone with a cryptocurrency wallet can send and receive Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain. Understanding how Bitcoin functions, however, is another story. We'll dive into that later. Next up, we're going to ask you to consider your skin in the game. See you then.